All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Virgil Parker. I am a United Nations Association Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 4. I focus primarily on advocating for education, the implementation of SDG 4 here across America and around the world. And I'm so excited you're here for this conversation about making the future real, turning the Pact for the Future into action. As many of you are aware, both here physically in person, and want to give a very, very special welcome to those online. As you're aware, the Pact for the Future was a very, very critical outline adopted by the United Nations in order to help us focus on the challenges we have today in our global society and understanding how we can address those challenges with international cooperation amongst countries around the world moving forward. And that's all critical, right? You want to understand that the pact was a very bold vision in order to address certain challenges. And the panel that we have with us today is going to help us kind of break down different parts of the pact, but more importantly, how to turn it into tangible action, right? Because as one, first of all, applaud you all for being here today, but how the same way you all are invested in this conversation, there are countless other people across the world who also want to see what was accomplished through the pact be brought into fruition. And we want to get a very in-depth understanding on how to do that. So I'm going to very quickly introduce our panel, and then we're going to hop right into the discussion. But just want to make it clear, we want to make this very interactive. So if you have questions throughout the panel, please feel free to walk up and speak into the microphone, and we'll be able to acknowledge. Same thing online. I'll be continuously checking the online server to, if you have questions, feel free to type them in. But we want this to be very conversational, right? Again, since simply the fact that you're here means that you care. So we want the solutions that live in this conversation to be utilized to people who want to reference them across the world. So without further ado, I want to introduce our very distinguished panel. I'm going to start on the far end to my left and introduce Dr. Maha Aziz. Dr. Aziz is an MAIR professor and author at New York University. So she's local, but has a very, very global footprint and is an expert in global risk, future trends, and solutions to complex policy challenges. Dr. Aziz, thank you for being with us today. Next, we have Amen Fru. Aman is a UN youth delegate from Ethiopia, representing young voices on international stages and championing inclusive policy design. Just to pause there for a second, part of the conversation you guys will hear today is, again, policy implementation, understanding policy from different global perspectives. And I'm glad that we have an array of international representation here. So thank you for that. Next, we have Ali Mustafa. Ali is the CEO of the International Youth Organization, working at the intersection of community development, youth empowerment, and global advocacy. So we're really happy to have Ali here today. And then last, and certainly not least, we have Ugratna Shrivastava. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Ugratna is the organizing partner for the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, as well as a policy advocate for youth engagement and environmental protection. So let's go ahead and hop into the first question, which I'll address to the panel. They're all going to come about this topic from a position of relevance between their work and what they do is important to the Pact. So Dr. Aziz, I want to start with you and ask, what is your perspective on the Pact for the Future, and how can young people help bring it into action? Please.
Thank you, Virgil. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, as you said, I'm based at NYU and focus on global risk future trends. So I'm going to offer some insights looking at the world through the lens of risk. Besides NYU, I also co-chair an AI policy at digital economics at the same time, and also advising on geopolitics and risks at the World Economic Forum, as well as enlightenment advisory. I thought I would just share some insights as to what I've heard in recent months as somebody who gives talks at forums like the Paris Peace Forum and COP29 in Baku. This was back in November. I have to say I've been encouraged. I feel there's a sense of engagement from young people at these big forums, which I think is frankly inspiring. I think there is definitely significant global representation, a lot of emphasis on making sure at these global discussions that not just young people, but people from the South are represented. And I think that's significant. I did also participate in the UN Summit of the Future here in New York in September, last September. Again, I was very encouraged by the presence of young people and the diversity of views. What I do remember hearing, however, is that a lot of these individuals from the global South and young people were saying that that the West has failed us, and this was while we were having discussions about the Pact of the Future, which is a very ambitious, inspirational piece of regulation. And others were saying on panels and also on the sidelines of the Summit of the Future, they were saying, does this pact apply to us in the non-Western context? So there was definitely a narrative that I was hearing at the UN Summit of the Future in September that maybe there is a need to look at the pact with a more critical eye and take a step back and acknowledge to what extent it applies to the local context, whether it's parts of South Asia, parts of Africa, and so forth. And this really builds on, this sentiment really builds on broader global risk trends. I'm sure everyone in the room is aware that we are now in the midst of a geopolitical shift, right? President Trump has in many ways shown that the U.S. role in the world is changing, okay? Yeah. The truth is, the U.S. hegemony, from our perspective and our work, focused on risk, has been in decline for at least 10 years. So it didn't just begin with Trump 1.0 or with Trump 2.0. We have been having these discussions for many years, for over a decade. So alongside the decline of U.S. hegemony, we talked about the rise of the other, right? Rise of Asia, rise of the global South, and two books I'll recommend by two friends of mine, Westlessness by Dr. Singapore, which, as you can guess what the book is about, and also The Future is Asian by Farhan. And the idea is that perhaps we should be, when you are making judgments as to how to enact certain ideas from the Pact of the Future, and as a young activist, perhaps you should be having a greater appreciation for how the world is evolving, right? We're moving away from this hegemony. And in our work, we talk about a global legitimacy crisis. Can the UN and the Pact of the Future thrive in the Trump 2.0 era? That's really what we need to think about. And from my perspective, from our work in global risk, it feels like President Trump has initiated a more policy-centric world. But that can be empowering. That can allow for more voices, for more actors driving change. And I think that's significant. The second point I wanted to bring up is the fact that the Pact of the Future didn't place a strong emphasis on democracy, on improving democracy around the world. And that's a significant omission from my perspective. There wasn't that much discussion about inclusive governance or promoting civil liberties. I guess I wonder what message does that send for actors of change going forward? Aren't these a priority? But again, if you take a step back, frankly, for almost 20 years, this could be the 20th year, in fact, of democratic decline around the world, but particularly in the Western context. So there are a lot of studies that actually suggest that Gen Z and millennials don't care as much about democracy, including in the Western context. So I would certainly encourage you to think about the fact that democracy is not a goal in the Pact of the Future explicitly, and the fact that democracy appears to be slightly dysfunctional around the world. It's not just what you might be observing here in the US. And I would also encourage you to think about where are we headed? Is there another stage to our political development? Or are we easing into a post-democracy era? Third, super quick, in terms of the Pact for the Future, if you look at it through an economic lens, it encourages to focus on inclusive growth, sustainable growth, which is very positive. It focuses on the AI transition, AI upskilling, which is needed as we transition to an AI economy. But I would also, and they even launched a global AI fund to support developing countries. to promote AI infrastructure. That is positive. And yet you already see movement towards this that excludes the UN. So for instance, I believe in Africa, NVIDIA has partnered up with the billionaire Mustafa, and they have launched an AI factory in Africa already, independent of government, it seems, and independent of the UN agency. And I think that is a sign of how power is evolving. You have other drivers of change, and that's something to keep in mind. The component that I think is missing in terms of the economic goals of the Pact for the Future is that transition, the potential loss of employment, the loss of occupational identity as we move to an AI economy. Not everyone will want to work in an AI economy. Not everyone will want or be able to achieve AI upskilling to be relevant. And that leads to a larger precariat class around the world. So I would just say that, just to wrap up, that to recognize that power is evolving. The UN is obviously still a legitimate force, but I think it might be more worthwhile to see the other actors of change that can help you enact certain ideals of the Pact for the Future, regional organizations, private actors, private funders. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Looking forward to having more of your input. And before you go, I just want to just to stress to our panelists, do your best at talking to the microphone, just for the streamers online. So if you want to turn the mic towards you, that is, that mic right there on the table. That's perfect. But go ahead, Amin. You can go next. Thank you, Dr. Aziz.
I think I'm on.
Oh, is the microphone on?
It's on.
Speak. Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Okay. Should have worked. Yeah. Thank you for the question. If a few of you guys are here wondering what I am doing on this panel, I was actually part of the Summit of the Future while the Pact for the Future was adopted, and it was a moment of hope for a lot of young people all over the world, and at the same time a moment of standing for a minute and reflecting on how these concepts have been affecting the global South in general. For starters, where I come from, I don't like packing the continent together saying Africa, because it's a continent of very diverse communities which have a totally different perspective towards things. But where I come from, properly East Africa, pretty much a similar community, we felt 100% underrepresented, 100%. A lot of people, not 100%, but a lot of people were very much pessimist towards the Pact, because a lot of young people were not consulted. Technically, there were very few young people who were consulted in the adoption process. So a very quick background on what I'm talking about is I'm part of the African Union Youth Delegates program, and it's just a fellowship program that runs in six East African countries, from my country, Ethiopia, to Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. And like I mentioned, technically three of these countries were directly affected by conflict: Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, the country I come from as well. And a lot of people didn't get access to the consultations, which were held online. And if there were consultations in person, they were not practical because no one was consulted. So even for us who had the opportunity to tap into this international system, we were not able to directly engage because government structures were hesitant about putting young delegates and labeling them delegates and sending them to such opportunities because of their political interests as well. But besides all the challenges I have already mentioned, we found ways to engage with European delegations coming in and supporting our ideas, collecting our inputs, and sending them through their channel. And the Pact was adopted. But I was in the room for some of the people, especially for people who are working around the climate sector, for people who are engaging with child rights. It was still a moment of pause. So even though I'm a very optimistic young person, I would also say for a lot of people, it's a moment of discouragement because we had this conversation when the Agenda 2030 was, on the table, when the SDGs were adopted. So, but I would say if there's technically nothing we can do about it being adopted, now we can have conversations about what we can do about it. So as an optimist young person, I have tried to pinpoint some ideas when it comes to localization. I don't know what your country context stand, but in my context, for starters, a lot of people don't know about the pact. For starters, no one. Like, it's a
That's
very
important.
few young people who know about the pact. So we can start localizing ideas. When we come to ideas about in relation to localization of the pact, we can start having the conversation about the pact and what makes it a different document this time. Because people they knew about the MDGs, they know about the SDGs, but like they were not seeing anything come down in our states. Okay, so we can start having these conversations, making campaigns for different goals. And quickly jumping into the other one is when in areas there are woke youth, like when there are young people who have interests on these areas, we can also have an organized get together and start for policy changes for accountability. Because some of my colleagues in Kenya last year, I don't know how many of you guys are aware, but they actually revolted strongly towards a finance bill that was going to happen in their country. There was a huge riot, and it was not another riot that happened in East Africa this time. It actually made change. The bill was cancelled, and they were back to their normal life. That's not a common thing, in a lot of countries. So, and especially in our context. So I would say organizing properly and coming up to the stages to have this conversation. And one last quick thing I would like to highlight as well is bridging participation gaps. For starters, I come from Addis, the capital of Ethiopia, and I don't see a lot of Ethiopians in this room or any of the rooms that I attend to, because there is a huge participation gap. Not just participation. When people participate, they don't get to meaningfully engage in processes. So bridging that gap is up to us, people in this room, who have the potentials, the powers, who've been engaging with the system for a while now. And that would actually make a meaningful change in adopting documents. Because if there were people in these rooms, I know they would have agendas that I forgot to mention, or I didn't get the time to research deeply for. So to all of these, I would expect I would see a slightly optimist chance for the pact, because it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation again about a new document which we are engaged in. But at the same time, these things, young people from every country, especially I would say from the global south, can start having conversations about. Thank you.
Thank you. I very much, before Ali speaks, we're about to transition the microphone, but I really do appreciate both your perspective and Dr. Aziz's perspective so far. And if I can speak to one thing you said, I think was really important, is the fact of the number of people who are unaware about the existence of this document. That's important to stress, right? Several billions of people across the world, several politicians and global actors, and those who have a stakeholdership in our global society. In order to get more tangible progress on this topic, one is getting the information out there to the global public, to the global south, and then also making sure that they have the infrastructure to support said parts of the pact for the future. So I do appreciate you emphasizing that, because one of the main things, again, this document came from 2024, but how many people are aware of its actual information? So that's important to point out. Ali, please. Same question about your role as it pertains to this pact, and how you think youth can help bring it into action.
First of all, good morning, everyone. And I would like to begin with this statement that Pact of the Future is just yet another document. Like, we had been having these documents since the UN have been formed. And it will become yet another document, like any other document, like just brushing under the carpet if we do not act upon it. If the world is in that state that we are talking about right now, and it's not world is not in this state from today. It has been going on since forever. World War II ended, UN was formed, and then there was Cold War, and wars never ended. There's been conflicts. There have been situations all around the world. We meet in Geneva, we meet in Vienna, we meet in New York. We do the gatherings. World leaders come, we talk, we have declarations, we have facts. And if we have those pacts and we have those declarations, my question is that why world is in this state today? If those pacts are there and they are supposed to protect human rights, they're supposed to encourage global development, they are supposed to encourage the rights of everyone. If those pacts are there, why are we in this state right now? And the answer is that we are in this state because those pacts, those declarations have not been inclusive. They're not inclusive. They are not made local. They're not being available for people. And the people have not been empowered to act upon those documents. We heavily relied on the government machineries. We heavily rely on the member states, the bureaucracy to do something for us. They have declarations, they have pact, and so many pacts. But what is our responsibility being an individual? What is our responsibility in terms of civil society? What is our responsibility being students? What is our responsibility being youth? That is really, really important to understand and take a charge for that. Pact for the Future will become yet another document like other documents if we do not act upon it. And it depends on how exclusive it is. Is it exclusive? That are there barriers? I don't think so. There are any barriers if you want to act upon the Pact for the Future, because there was heavy presence of civil society organizations and a heavy presence of youth organizations and individuals when the pact was being formed. We all were present there for months, and I would say for a year right after the end of the SDG summit in 2023, we were right on to the task to develop the Pact for the Future. There were consultations. There were thousands of consultations taking place around the world. There were consultations taking place online, and that was the testament that when we are creating the pact, it was very inclusive. So forming a pact, okay, the job is done. It is announced. Everything happened. The summit of the future ended. Now we have a pact. Now it's on us. Like, are we going to make it yet another pact, or we are going to act upon it? There's civil society mechanism out there. There are youth mechanism out there. One of the youth mechanism led by the major group of children and youth. That's how they're doing their work. In the capacity of civil society, we are trying to make it inclusive in a way that we are having their content being spoken and worked around with the civil society organizations on the ground, on the roots, with the people directly. If we want to achieve the success for the Pact of the Future, and still there is a way out of the situation where the world is right now, and the way out is that we all have to act in a uniform way. And if we are acting in a uniform way, if our actions are collaborative with each other, and then we can make the words of pact a reality, and it cannot become yet another and yet another a document. I think this is our way, the pact coming on a right time when we are having geopolitical shift. And pact can be an hopeful document, and a pact can be an hopeful way for a lot of people to act upon, to look upon it, and maybe a chance for this generation to not to repeat the mistakes of the generations before us, that we did not act and we stay silent and depend and stay dependent on the state resources. For the reason there is civil society and it's in existence and it's getting more and more in front. Thank you.
No, thank you. And go out, right before you go, I want to stress one other point, Ali, that you mentioned, is stressing the importance of inclusivity, right? There are very varying feedbacks around the Pact for the Future. As comprehensive as it is, people pose the question: Is it inclusive enough on many of the challenges? Obviously, we have the 17 SDGs and many other components of the United Nations to try to address the issues around the world and what everything that impacts us as a global society. But you always, as we evolve with our challenges in this world, ask yourself, have we considered enough as we are building a blueprint on how to create a better future, right? So I'm really appreciative of you emphasizing the inclusivity of it, right, and the need to remain inclusive as we look forward to the impact on future generations. And with that, you go out, and I'm really excited about your perspective. And how what you bring to the table in perspective of youth and children, because again, we want this to be actionable not just for us as adults, but for young people who see the need, right, to stress being involved in creating a future for even their generations and themselves. So very curious to know how, from your perspective on the Pact for the Future, and how you believe young people can get involved on its implementation. Please.
Thank you so much. And thanks also for the generous introduction and everyone else that came before and highlighted some very, interesting points. So as the moderator Virgil introduced, I'm one of the two organizing partners for the Major Group for Children and Youth, which is the mandated body for youth engagement in various UN processes. And it's also the co-organizer of the ECOSOC Youth Forum that's starting tomorrow / day after tomorrow, with Youth Blast starting tomorrow. My colleague Same and I in the planning committee. So we look forward to seeing several of you if you will be joining the Youth Forum and the Youth Blast tomorrow to weigh in on some of the questions of this session, right? So what actions can young people in civil society take to implement the Pact for the Future? So a little bit into the history. So young people were involved in the shaping of the Pact within the avenues possible. Of course, a number of negotiations of Pact for the Future were closed, but young people did lead more than 30 consultations organized virtually or in person from 2022 to 2024, September 2022 to 2024, and then eventually the Youth Action Day of Summit of the Future that took place in New York. If you look at the Pact itself, so as you know, it has 4 different chapters and then 2 addendums to it. Specifically, the youth recommendations on Chapter 4 of the Pact, the 3 of them, to implement a global youth investment platform, a UN Youth Fund, revitalizing the UN Youth Fund, and drafting some kind of principles for meaningful youth participation. There is a Pact Youth Working Group that was convened by the Youth Office, and that Pact Working Group is actually co-chaired by young people, and it has 3 different task forces that are implementing these 3 deliverables for the Pact. I'm myself co-chairing the task force on the investment platform, and we have different colleagues that are involved in different task forces to deliver those specific deliverables on the Pact. So what we have seen, at least for the implementation of the recommendations, some recommendations under Chapter 4, a very inclusive model that has involved youth constituencies and UN agencies in sort of jointly collaborating together to implement those deliverables. Having said that, more needs to be done. We have not seen any kind of youth or multi-stakeholder engagement when it has come to implementing other deliverables of the Pact, whether those are the deliverables or outcomes under FFD, Financing for Development, under Global Digital Compact, under Peace and Security Nexus. It has all been very UN driven. So there are working groups for each of these topics as well. The 5 working groups that are implementing the Pact, but we have not seen youth or civil society engagement in any other working group. We've only seen that in the youth working group. And that is in contrast with the actors that were involved in actually shaping the Pact. So you saw a big push from civil society organizations to get a lot of language and get the momentum behind the Pact. But when it came to implementation, we have pretty much not heard or seen on what is happening. Specifically, let's talk about it one by one. When it comes to the Global Digital Compact, some of you may know about something called as the STI, Science Technology Interface Agenda at the UN, which is linked with something called as the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, TFM. And that has designating engagement of civil society. And as you may have seen, after the Pact was formed, there's something called as the UN Tech Envoy Office, which is now being reformed into the UN Technology Office at the UN as sort of the one-stop point for all the technology and science policy issues. They have been very progressive when it comes to engaging youth and civil society on their day-to-day work, like partnering with them on events, on consultations. However, when it comes to implementation of Global Digital Compact, and this is not just on the UN Technology Office, but the UN system as a whole, most of the financing on on technology, AI, and governance of AI is pushed to member states themselves. The UN is positioned as a multilateral body that facilitates technology transfer, but no resource building is provided within the UN itself rather than supporting other than supporting with some core budget with both ITU and the new digital office that has been made. There's an AI fund that the UN is trying to build, but the process for this has been not very transparent. So civil society organizations, youth organizations do not know about this AI fund. And so there needs to be a call for this to be more transparent, and civil society and youth should have access to those spaces, not just the fund, but actually the design of the fund. I mean, if you can do that for the youth investment platform and other outcomes of the Pact, why can't you do that across the board, right? And then when it comes to discourse on future generations and its follow-up on Declaration of Future Generation, we have seen some kind of youth involvement there, but I must point out that a lot of discussion on future generations is often co-opted by large foundations and think tanks that are not necessarily representing the voices of frontlines or those communities that are poised to feel most impact of climate crisis or multiple crises that we are facing in the future. So you would not necessarily see whether, it's young people from African SIDS or young people that are in Pacific or even civil society organizations. They're not having access to this spaces because there's a consortium of some very rich, powerful actors that are pushing for certain demands. We don't disagree with a lot of their demands, but we disagree with the space not being open or being inclusive to broader perspectives that should be informing this discussion. And as we say in Major Group for Children and Youth, the discussion, the young people in civil society that are on the front lines should be in the front seat of driving these engagements. Coming to peace and security, and I'll try to be brief on this. We saw that there was a recommendation that they gave a clear mandate for intergovernmental engagement of young people in all peace and security decision-making process. So this is a language that was new, and we have not seen this language in the GC, in the YPS agenda in the past. So there have been Security Council resolutions on youth, peace and security, as you may know, in 2015, and then follow-ups in 2019, and there's a whole community around it. But we have not seen a language, intergovernmental language, the government language agreed by all member states that said, hey, we need intergovernmental engagement on all peace and security topics, which includes UN Security Council, by the way. So that was one very interesting thing that took place. And I know that there are youth actors, not just in DCY, many youth actors that are working on sort of, making that happen. However, when it comes to specific demands that were tabled and were very much being pushed forward in lead up to the Pact, which is, again, the reform of the Security Council, we did not see much of the needle moved. The Action 39G of the Pact suggests that intensifying effort to reach an agreement on future of veto. However, we did not necessarily, and that this should be addressed as a matter of priority and without delay. We are happy to hear that, but it would have been better to see a more actionable recommendation on this. Guided by the YPS agenda, it is important to include young people in this reform process, despite youth not being mentioned as a clear stakeholder group in this particular action. So the recommendation in the Pact, what I'm trying to say, that talks about Security Council reform and veto, does not necessarily include partnerships with youth or civil society. It does not say how that reform process would look like. Again, we want to stress that no country should have unilateral power to override will of the international community, particularly when it is a party to a dispute in question, which amounts to conflict of interest. No country or actor is above international law and international soft law, and any violations that go against the purpose and principles of the UN itself. So, but we need to be also grounded in the reality that we are facing today. While reforming the Security Council membership of voting procedures would require amending the UN Charter, a process that demands 2/3 of the support in GA and ratification by 2/3 of member states, including all 5 permanent members, there are still creative avenues for holding accountability within the existing framework. For example, the UN General Assembly could submit a legal question to International Court of Justice each time a veto is cast, prompting a broader discussion on the legality and implication of the decision. Similarly, we also call upon making UNGA, the General Assembly, which is the universal body that has all member states, more strengthened so that it could keep countries accountable and driving the force forward on that. Finally, I want to say that we saw one disappointment in the Pact when it came to backsliding on broader civil society engagement. There was a paragraph on major groups and other stakeholders that was taken out, which was not an ideal approach to the Pact because of some actors lobbying against major groups and other stakeholders or member states, who knows. But it is very important that we recognize major groups and other stakeholders as broad sectors of society that are universal and open to any group to engage and have mandate, not just in Agenda 2030, but across more than 30 to 40 UN processes that are linked with 2030 Agenda, GA, and beyond. And having, in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that an ECOSOC Youth Forum actually was recognized in the Pact in Chapter 5 on global governance as one of the bodies for young people to share ideas with member states. So we look forward to welcoming several of you that are coming in the next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Gratna. Well, that was a very informative first round of questions. First of all, I want to stress to our audience, please, we want this to be interactive. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or, walk right up to the microphone. And also, I know we have some new guests in the room and online. Just want to emphasize, we're just doing a very comprehensive overlook on the Pact for the future. What it has accomplished, what we hope for it to accomplish, what are the topics of the Pact for the future, and most importantly, how we turn this into action and make this not only an international cooperation effort, but a cross-generational effort, even with the inclusivity of youth, right? So please, online and in person, if you have any questions, please continue to have those ready as we move forward. I want to direct the next question to Dr. Aziz, and it's going to be something that Gratna brought forward, was the purpose also of international organizations. The importance of inclusivity of international organizations when you were trying to position youth and other generations to get involved with the Pact for the Future and bringing the Pact for the Future into action. What role do some of the international organizations play, be it foundations, be it in organizations like the United Nations? Tell us about how they can play an active role in supporting the action for the Pact for the Future.
Sure.
And speak to the mic if you can, much as possible. Yeah, it's okay. Just for online folks.
I think that I'm not sure if I'm the best person to talk about international organizations, given the experience of these three. I think they'd probably be better placed, but I think we should look for a range of partners. I think young people who are trying to enact the ideals of the Pact for the Future should be looking at the private sector.
Sure.
You should be working with tech leaders. I know that certain tech companies have a bad reputation and for legitimate reason, but there are tech leaders, there are tech companies that are genuinely trying to do good. And I think if there was a partnership between young international activists and some of these tech leaders to drive change, I think that could be very positive. Additionally, I think it's important to look for funding for your efforts in the private sector. Billionaire-driven foundations, again, I know that billionaires have a bad reputation for a lot of reasons, but the reality is there are some who are genuinely committed to trying to solve the world's problems. And so I would recognize that traditional drivers of change are losing legitimacy or are very slow, and identify the local partners that can be driving change with you. And support your efforts in a quicker way, and really, look beyond just government actors, because I think we know that this crisis of political legitimacy I mentioned earlier is not something that's just temporary. It has been here on and off for 20 years in most political systems, and of course we know the UN also has a struggle to overcome in terms of regaining legitimacy, especially in this Trump 2.0 era. So that's what I would say.
Certainly. And before I go to the next speaker on the same topic, do you want to speak to think tanks as well? I know you've worked with think tanks and they're very effective in informing some of the policy matters. Do think tanks play an important role?
For certain, I think there are certain groups that you should be aware of if you're not already. Groups like Global Citizen,
Okay.
Which is a major nonprofit that drives global change, engaging with world leaders at the highest level, creating movements and campaigns that involve young people around the world. They also have the strategy of working with celebrities to help raise awareness about what they're doing and then put pressure on government. They have worked towards raising millions of dollars, billions of dollars from governments for everything from vaccine development during COVID to reducing poverty. So if you can partner with a group like that, that already has that network and global presence, I think that could be very positive. But also the World Economic Forum, again, another organization that does have, is criticized for being too elite-centric, and yet they are the ones that launched the major AI summit in Africa, in Rwanda, just recently, if I'm not mistaken. And I think there are actors of change. I'm not anti-UN. I think the UN has symbolism. It has a history. You should be aware of the pact and the ideals in it. But I think it could, in order to enact change quicker, work with those partners that are already very much invested in driving change and
Yes.
have a successful record in doing so.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else want to contribute to this topic of how international organizations can play a role in supporting action behind the Pact? Emma, do you want to give a perspective there, please?
So in line, of course, with the international organizations, I would also like to highlight a bit of regional organizations on the process as well, because one way or another they're involved in the bigger scale. The first one is in my mandate, the past year, one of our calls was having international organizations and high-level decision-making bodies, even including regional organizations, should have youth sounding boards, which consult them, which help them in deciding decisions that are in a way in alignment to the current momentum, because as most of you guys already know, Africa has one of the biggest youth populations in the world, and coming up there's a high energy, pretty much very energetic, strong young people that are raising in Africa as well. So having sounding boards, because it might be a bit harder with the current political structure in our continent to involve young people directly in the processes. So until then, until democracy is fully realized, we in a way suggested UN and other regional organizations to have youth sounding boards, which advise them, which consult them, and which help them decide. So maybe intentionally institutionalizing these things would definitely help the UN and other regional organizations to create a significant income, especially to support youth leadership in such processes. The other one is something I'd like to also highlight is international organizations can also have progress reports, youth progress reports on how the youth have been engaging. I know the UN Youth Office has a scorecard. I think that's the right term. They score how many people have been supporting, have been engaging in processes, how many young people are in the UN system, officially hired and moving on. But that's a good example to take, and other international organizations also can adopt the same system and start to do a progress reports every year on, especially on all 5 aspects of the pact, but more or less highlighting the need of the area. For example, I would suggest international peace and security chapter of the Pact for the Future should also have a progress report that's aligned to it, especially in the context of conflict-affected areas like my region and some other regions of the world. So progress report studies on these topics would most definitely help. And again I would like to highlight, as Maha already mentioned as well, it's not just the responsibility of a UN organization, but also think tanks and of course foundations. Because one of the things I was told when I came to the Exo Forum here again is the world has raised their eyes off the term development support, because I know you guys, most of you guys would be aware, but there has been huge budget cuts that support many people, starting from healthcare, from WASH to different sectors. I mentioned these 2 because they're highly important. Education, healthcare, and WASH services have been cut through different development programs. And now the world's eyes are getting one step away from development. So people were suggesting that I put my eyes more on think tanks, on foundations that are intentionally trying to support the system because of just, of course, they're going to have different interests behind them. But I see that as a good alternative. So mentioning these things, and I'd like to pass on the mic.
Sure. Before I go to Ali, want to ask any questions from the audience so far? Questions or comments? Oh, sure. Please, sir, if you want to.
General question for the panelists, but I was thinking of one of the themes.
Could you speak into the microphone if possible? Just for we have an audience online. I'm sorry that just for audio first. Thank you. And feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Dario Pepelici. I am a teacher and model UN advisor in the state of Florida in a school called North Broward Preparatory School.
Okay.
And just one of the themes that I've noticed from all the speakers, by the way, I'm very grateful. We're all very grateful that you're here and sharing all these ideas and very valuable information. But one of the themes that I've noticed is there's just not enough awareness about the Pact for the Future. And I'm wondering, and this was mentioned as well, a lot of it is because there seems to be like a lot of different programs and pacts and agreements and goals. For example, if we think of the SDGs, there's a lot of attention on the SDGs, right? For example, at the school I work at, there's a lot of work being done with different clubs and different programs within the school and projects that are very SDG centric. So I'm wondering how some of the messaging and some of the education, some of the information shared has to look at how the Global Compact complements the SDGs, how it informs and some of the ways to approach work towards the SDGs, and how also it brings new things that might have not been addressed sufficiently in the SDGs. So I'm wondering if you can all talk about that. Thank you.
Okay. Ali, I'll direct that first question to you. If you want to respond to that, that's okay.
First, let me on the international organizations and that.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead.
I'll answer your question on the second part of my conversation. The first about the international organizations. Again, I would say that like if international organizations have been there and successful, why are we here? Why the world is in this state? And don't get surprised if in September, United States get out of the UN at all. Like completely say that we don't want to be member of the UN anymore. Don't get surprised because this is coming and this is coming this September. But the role of international organizations have been really important since after World War II and even before World War I, when we have the League of Nations. When we see the fall of League of Nations, we saw the formation of World War II, the death of the millions and millions of people. But are we ready for this another world order to fall? That is, we are calling the United Nations and other international organizations that exist right now. And UN is one organization. World Economic Forum, we talked about it again before in a conversation that it also exists in a form of international organization. We have many other forms of international organizations like International Organization on Migration, then many other that are also small affiliates of the UN. To make them all successful, we need a non-elite approach and we need a grassroots approach. We do talk about what is happening in the world right now. And most importantly, we need to understand when we talk about Trump 2.0, we need to understand that his power comes from the base of the people. He is elected and he got elected by the people. And the people who did not have the knowledge or people who may not know what we're doing. And if there is a gap, if we are not reaching the people out on the ground, and if we are not educating people, we are not letting them know that what UN is or what we do, or what this globalization means and how it is powerful, how it can help them, how it can help the world, and how it has saved the world so far from preventing World War III and any other major conflicts that can possibly lead into a nuclear conflict if these international organizations didn't exist. The fault is ours. We never reach those people out. When we're not reaching those people out, someone else is reaching them out, and they're telling them, and then they are going to support what they are being told. So if we are not reaching them out, we cannot blame the other person to reach them out with whatever he believes or they believe in what is going on into the world. So we have to remove this mentality that we call the elite mentality. I've been part of World Economic Forum. I was in the Global Governance Council of the Global Shippers community, and my exit with them was very ugly. And it was on the very principle that we need the structure of global shippers community on the ground with the youth coming from the grassroots. And their argument was, no, we need elites. Straight up, in a communication, we need youth that can have some financial background, that can bring some value to the table. For me, the value to the table is the grassroots coming in with the problems, and they know the solution of what they're going through. We have millions and millions of example of young people who are on the ground, and they are from the grassroots, they are from villages, and they come up with their own solution, and they're surviving those solutions. We need to connect those solutions. We need to bring those people in international organizations. We need to bring those people into the governance of those international organizations if we want to make them successful. The elite mentality, the exclusivity have to go. Have to go. It has to go. We have to make table inclusive for the people coming from the ground. Now, answering gentlemen's questions, teachers' question about how we can, that it's absolutely it's absolutely true that the knowledge is not there. People don't know about the Pact for the Future. People don't even know about the SDGs. Just last year, I was doing the massive outreach in the West Coast, and I will just quote the university UCLA. It's an Ivy League of West Coast. I was there, and I was in a conversation with the students on the master level, and my question with the class of 500 people was, do you know about Sustainable Development Goal, UN SDGs? Only one person answered in the class of 500 people that I'm talking to, the students who are masters. So, and I was talking to the students of social work, social policy, and public policy. They don't know about SDGs at UCLA of the class of 500 people, and now we're doing work there on SDGs. That is just one example. I have done such conversations, such outreach in so many different universities. And my first question in those universities with the students is that, do you know about SDGs? When they don't know about SDGs, how they're going to know about Pact for the Future and how they can make the interlink? I think Pact for the Future is something really important, but we need to do something that is a basic work of telling the kids in the school and in universities first that what UN is, what they do, and what SDGs are, and how important they are. We only have 5 years left to achieve what we want to achieve in the Agenda 2030. And we have to do this grassroots outreach as soon as we can.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that informative perspective. Hugo, I'm going to transition to you, but also I know we have a couple of guests who just entered the room and into the chat. Again, we're discussing the Pact for the Future and the importance of turning it into action and how to turn it into action. Right now, we have sort of a two-pronged question. One, dealing with international organizations, how international organizations can support the cross-generational effort of supporting the Pact for the Future. And then also, we just had a second question from the audience that's really important about messaging, right? Messaging to allow people to be more aware of the Pact for the Future and also other topics such as the SDGs and things of that nature, which go hand in hand. One, you need to have messaging for an understanding, and then you also need resources from the international organizations that have stakeholdership. So I know it's a two-pronged question. It's a lot to kind of break down, but you I know you want to address either one part of that question, and then I can transition to other parts of the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think what the previous speaker Ali was just saying, I align with a lot of those views, especially on that we cannot have business class lanes in the UN and in international space, right? That, some groups get a preferred treatment and everybody else is stand in a queue. So that cannot happen. I think if you're looking at what can addressing your first part of the question, I did have some notes prepared on it. What can international organizations do to support what young people are saying and so on? So I think the very first part of that recommendation that we would make is stop duplicating. Stop duplicating what young people are already doing. Young people organize and youth constituencies, youth organizations, youth-led organizations, youth-serving organizations organize in a particular way to engage in certain processes, which means that whether they organize on a local level, regional level, or global level, in their own realities. Stop prescribing to them and starting your own youth programs on certain topics without actually consulting with young people or knowing their realities. So listen to what the young people are saying and do not design things that are for young people without young people. So that is at the basic premise of how international organizations should operate. And there are some very good models of that. And Ali talked about IOM. IOM, in fact, has a designated constituency called the Migration Youth and Children Platform that leads their Migration Youth Forum every year and regional consultations. They have a seat in their main advisory body of the GFMD, which is the Global Forum on Migration and Development. And that is a good model of how you work with and for young people. There are also bad models. I can name them, probably not very diplomatic to do that. And then you, of course, have examples of the Rio Conventions, all the 3 Rio Conventions, climate, biodiversity, desertification, but then also chemicals and waste COPs, BRS, Minamata, and the Stockholm Convention. They have very designated models of youth engagement and how they've built that with young people. So those are, some very good models to learn from. And so the way the international organizations can support is to actually listen to young people and co-design things with them rather than designing it from your own perspective, sitting in Washington, D.C. and be like, oh, this is how we should do our youth program. And that doesn't necessarily reflect your views. You have to work with the rights holders when it comes to shaping their realities. There's also a need that any organization or group that tries to decentralize the agenda, if you have a club-based model where young people have to pay a certain amount to join your hub or local hubs, right? That's not universal by design. That's not inclusive by design. So we cannot really have that as the only voice, which currently happens to be the case, dominating some of this agenda on national level. So we support the call for having more localized urban SDG hubs or whatever you may want to call them that are truly universal and that bring young people that are from different communities. And I can, Ali talked about one email, I can tell you about hundreds of those emails where we have seen UN agencies and international organizations talk for youth. We want a youth in this panel who looks nice. And what does that mean, right? What do you mean by a nice looking youth? We want a youth that are coming from a particular academic background versus an indigenous youth who may not have gone to university, but indigenous people are the safeguarders of the world's 80%, 90% biodiversity. So they know the actual reality. And we have seen a lot of that discrimination happening across the board. Some of that comes from not knowing better. Some of them, who knows? I cannot speak to the intention, but I would like to believe that a lot of that comes from not knowing how to do things in a better way. So this is very, very important. And when it comes to decentralizing agenda, I think SDGs are a framework which we can use to broadcast some of this information more. I don't think, being very honest, I don't think we can decentralize Pact for the Future to be known in every classroom because it's one of the many frameworks. If SDGs and 2030 agenda is well known, let's ride on that wave and try to make interlinkages with the SDG agenda and see how Pact is connected with them and try to decentralize information with what is already known, to young people widely.
Yeah. No, thank you. That was very important. I do want to, and again, more questions from the audience. Please prepare and you can step up. I do want to give the opportunity to Dr. Aziz and Amen to speak around the first part of the question, the second part of the question around awareness. And Dr. Aziz, let me go to you for a second because Gartner just brought up a really good point about bringing SDGs to the classroom, right? I know you teach on a collegiate level, but even in primary school and secondary school, is there a way, going back to the point of awareness, which was brought forth by a teacher, is there a way that we should incorporate the SDG agenda in the classroom so that more young people can at least be aware of what it is and then learn how to organize behind it? Can you speak to that too?
That would be the ideal scenario, right? If we could integrate it into education. I don't know how that will play out in this country when obviously there are changes with the Department of Education, and
Right.
I'm not sure what that means. But I think the fact that an event like this exists for Model UN, teams in schools around the world is very encouraging. Maybe Model UN can be used as a tool to educate more students. I went to the UN International School many years ago. We had not only UN, but we also had UNIS UN. So we would have a summit every year at the UN General Assembly Hall. I think what's encouraging is that there are groups like Model UN that are able to educate. How do we make it at scale? I think that would require partnerships with organizations that already have that track record of success. As I said, groups like Global Citizen, can there be a more defined partnership with schools to educate young people about the Pact and the SDGs? I also think that it's worth noting that in certain environments, for instance, I think it's the University of Barcelona, they've mandated now that every university student must take a course on climate change. We've already heard rumors that in countries like China, every student must learn AI skills from age 6. So I think if there was a way to mandate in our respective countries that that education about global affairs, education about the UN could be integrated with either university education or school education, that would be ideal. But again, it can only happen if you have funding. The other point that I didn't mention before, beyond the billionaires, the tech leaders, the nonprofits like World Economic Forum, let's not forget the private sector. Remember back during the pandemic, I know we've all put the pandemic behind us, but when many of us felt that our governments were lacking and struggling to cope with the effects of the pandemic, we did see the private sector step up in terms of looking after employees, in terms of supporting with vaccine, in terms of using their company resources towards building ventilators and so forth. So in that environment where we had a global systemic shock, we did see the private sector step up. Right now, as many have alluded, we are in some ways in another global systemic shock because of Trump 2.0. Right? He's challenging international norms. He's putting aside democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we should refer back to whatever playbook we had during the pandemic when there was this global systemic shock and try to apply that to today. And again, I think the private sector could be, certain corporations could be amenable. They would be open to collaborations with Model UN and other youth groups to help educate and fund such programs. So
Sure.
I would say that could be a way forward.
Sure. Thank you, Doctor. And I mean, I'll end with you on this last topic around awareness. I know you were the first to bring it up, but even specifically, if you can speak to this, are there any examples of campaigns that you've seen that have been successful, be it campaigns around the SDGs or any UN affiliated works, and any campaigns you'd recommend that organizations try to model when forming a campaign on awareness for the Pact of the Future? Feel free to speak to that as well as when you speak to the importance of awareness, please.
So I was Dr. Aziz was also talking. There's something I really would like to highlight, that the global affairs isn't just for people who are in the international relations field or politics, or because that's a huge stereotype that's keeping a lot of people from engaging with the system. For starters, my co-delegate from Ethiopia is a med school student. He's just like 4th year right now, and while back at home, everyone's like, "What are you doing here? Like, you should be studying your medicine, like your books, and you shouldn't be here in this room." So that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people to start engaging with the system. So that's how they challenge the questions like, why don't you integrate this with the system? And people who work in the education area sector, their responses are like, these are for people who have specific interests. But guess what? Everyone is in politics one way or another, well, whatever we do. So it should be one of the ways we should work on ways that we can integrate it into the system. So like recently in Ethiopia, the government has introduced a freshman course, global trends for everyone, starting from engineering to medicine to international relations. Anyone who's not decided their major, they're going to take that course. And guess what? People find it to be the most boring course for people who are not intentionally learning international relations. I know it's probably going to be boring if you have no interest there in a certain field, but instead of just imposing courses on students, making them to be more appealing and integrating experiences like the Model UN can also support students to start to engage with the system, understand how things work, and have more interest in the area. So, of course, I don't know how many of the countries in the world will relate to these, but in our region, education lacks practicality. It's just theory and up on the stage thing. So that's why a lot of people find it to be boring to engage. So experiences like the Model UN, since it's already been mentioned, would be a very good way instead of just imposing courses, because I know learning AI might be more interesting because there are a lot of features that pique the interest of people. But in courses like international relations, politics, global trends, I think we need more practical and of course exposure. I know. So I don't know how many of you guys know, but the UN Civil Society Conference was held in Nairobi this last year, and a lot of people from the world were not present. It was just more of an African thing, honestly. Like I can say more than half of the people were from Kenya. And it was just one of the most disappointing conferences I've been to in terms of diversity and inclusion, because I know countries like the US, countries like Geneva, Switzerland, and Vienna are not accessible for a lot of people, but Kenya is actually accessible. It was very easy. I know opportunities are very short, but the knowledge and the understanding and our perception towards the placement of conferences, because I know I am one of the people who argue that conferences are not accessible. Coming to New York is not for everyone, because we face issues with visa and everything, and I know how much I suffered to get my visa, and a lot of my colleagues from Sudan and South Sudan are not going to be able to make it, God knows for how long. So I think you guys are getting the point I'm trying to make. So whenever there are areas with access, people should be able to come push the challenges and be there, be present, because that's whenever you get the chance, whenever you get the opportunities, if you're not able to utilize them, you cannot complain about opportunities being out there.
Yeah.
One last thing, I'll be over. But when it comes to the campaigns, I don't know any sample campaigns, especially in our area, in our sector. But I would like to highlight something that was happening during the Civil Society Conference. I think you were there, you got on the Civil Society Conference. There were good hashtags. We commit, everyone's commit, who was committing. And for people in Kenya, for people who are based in Kenya, and for very few other countries that are in the East African community, it was a good starters for them to start asking questions about what is this we commit hashtag going around our country, what's going on. People started to read about it, know about it, and there's a high raise in awareness in the Kenyan context after the 69th Civil Society Conference that just got held in Kenya. So hashtags like that. Because and now with the digital age going, I know there's a very huge gap in access when it comes to Africa and the rest of the world. But there are very small progresses. We cannot always complain about things. I see progresses going on every other day. So I would also suggest having a consistent push towards campaigns like these, so that people can start asking questions and learn more about it.
Sure. No, thank you. I mean, to your point with the access of TikTok, and then great. I'm glad to see questions from the audience. I was going to say with the access of TikTok and Instagram and things of those measures, it's even a hashtag for those who can, to your point, have access to it. For those who want to ask questions, feel free to line up behind the microphone. For those who want to ask, to be aware of the Pact for Future, the 2030 agenda or anything, at least it's a mechanism that we can use to put messaging out there. We're running down to the last about 20 minutes or so of the panel, but I'm glad we have some questions. So please feel free to ask your question.
Hi, my name is Armani Maureen Bove. I'm a rising senior political science pre-law major at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. My question is a little bit about countries like Haiti, Sudan, Somali, like regions like that don't have financial resources or support from a lot of government or international organizations due to media and a lot of things that's going on with AI, and especially with the turnaround and Trump and Project 2025. I don't feel confident that a lot of those measures will be held to a certain standard. So my question is, how can the Pact for the Future be leveraged to support countries like Haiti in building like climate resilience and infrastructure despite the limited financial resource? I know you talked about grassroots events and stuff like that. How does the Pact for the Future plan to support those grassroots leadership roles and those civil societies in like these fragile regions?
Certainly. Who would like to take a stab at that question? I'll leave you right now. And I would say, while they answer, feel free to sit down for a moment if you'd like while they answers the question. And then one last thing I'll say is, to Amen's point, I'm happy that we have these types of forums that are not just in person, but also hybrid, right? So for accessibility, and I think that's part of the importance to answer her question. But please, Ali, if you'd like to take address of what she just asked, and then other people can give their input.
The access and the Pact of the Future, how Pact of the Future can address. I'll be honest with you, I have read Pact of the Future from different angles multiple times. I have taken different AI helps to read the Pact of the Future to understand if there are different perspectives. Pact of the Future cannot address what you are asking for at all. It gives new modalities, new frameworks, offer new solutions. What I think the solution when people will have the problem of finances, funding and aid being pulled, and we have to decide, is aid is sustainable or trade is sustainable? We want aid or we want trade? Trade means like if we want to get, create our own mechanisms to handle such things when there is a shortfall of aid and resources. There come the way then we gonna focus on asset-based community development, a mechanism we call ABCD. That is simple and very easy to do, and something that we actually founded at the UN, at the UN Civil Society Conference in 2019, and not in Nairobi. While I agree with my sister that Nairobi conference were not what we wanted it to happen. The mechanism that we created with the UN Civil Society Conference in 2019, I was the youth co-chair of the conference, and the mechanism that we created was to reach out youth and people where they do not even have the access to internet, where they do not have seen the building of a school, where they study literally under the trees, and reach those people out who have not ever heard about the word United Nations and bring their voices at the UN Civil Society Conference. Our team was very successful and able to do that we did a massive outreach. We were fortunate enough to have a little bit of funding where people can travel, but we mobilized community leaders, leaders who can speak their language. First of all, we removed the barrier of the language, English. Okay, the content is in English, or you are at the UN, you have to come to New York or Salt Lake City or the places and you got to speak English. No, that barrier was removed. We were speaking to them. We were creating content in their language. We were reaching them out in their languages. And then they understood what we're talking about. And we were able to successfully include their input into the documentation, and we were able to work with them. That is the start. That is the start of something big that is now happening. Then we had the declaration at the Civil Society Conference at the end, we called the Youth Climate Compact, and that formed the International Organization of Youth that I'm leading right now. And we formed this mechanism, International Youth Conference, where we were reaching people out with the UN knowledge, with the UN access right on their doorsteps, where they do not have to come to New York anymore, where they do not have to come to Geneva HQ or Vienna HQ anymore.
Sure.
We were reaching them out. And when pandemic comes, I think this model become more successful. We were using hybrid model. We were engaging a whole new different sort of audience and young people for the first time that we have never worked with them before. During the pandemic, we opened this new door of an opportunity. And then what happening right now, we have this International Youth Conference we do. It do take place in the US, but it happens in India, in Pakistan, in Egypt,
Mhm.
and now in Sierra Leone. It all happened in local languages. We do provide them the content, we do provide them the expertise. Okay, this is what's going to happen, we're going to discuss this. We have taken 6 points from the Summit of the Future.
Sure.
In the US, we're going to do it in English, we're going to stream them, but we encourage you to do that in French. We want to encourage you to do that in Arabic. We encourage you to do that in Hindi in your community. And they started to doing that. And it's happening. And now it's happening. It is not known because we are still in the experimental phase. We are growing with that. And we are bringing those voices at the UN now.
Thank you.
We are trying to bridge that gap. And I think the solution, when the aid is full off and when we are, threatened by the new agendas, that's when these things come in, that where people take actions on their own and create the new mechanism where it's not dependent on money, but rather on the available resources and assets we have. And we mobilize those assets and resources to bridge those gaps and then make those things permanent.
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to take one more perspective on the individual's question. We're going to take your question next, but did anybody else want to respond to the question about how the Pact for Future can address countries like Haiti or other countries with limited resources? One more perspective, and then I'd love to take your question before we get to the last 10 minutes. Amanda, did you want to go? Sure.
Yeah. So I know, for starters, the context of South Sudan, the context of Sudan, the context of Somalia, because they're my neighbor countries there. And as Ali mentioned already, I would like to highlight that I don't think, especially with the current momentum, the Pact addresses the current momentum in a way makes the Pact outdated. In a way, I would like to highlight in a way, because the Pact was an optimist document that the world is going to was supposed to support, and now with the cuts of the aids and everything, everyone's eyes are confused with the again he mentioned earlier, the US just might pull out tomorrow and the world might be at a shake again about the implementation of the Pact, because we had the conversation about the Pact because the SDGs were not going anywhere. So again, I would like to highlight, even though I'm a very optimist person, as I said earlier, I don't think there are direct ways, especially it's not just access to these things that the youth lack. We also lack access to these countries for several reasons, with the conflicts going on, with a lack of access and aid. And in few conversations that I've had, people mentioned humanitarian issues are up there to start having conversations about the UN for them. Now, if you go with the concept of the Pact, if you bring the document to them, and if you want to start conversation, they're like, sorry, we're hungry. We're bleeding right here. We're suffering in this way. We're suffering in that way. Climate is killing us. So we cannot have these conversations unless and otherwise humanitarian support is provided to us. So
Yes.
I think unless and otherwise we address these until the people have their foods and until they go to the hospitals, they get their clinics fixed. I don't think there are other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're coming down to the last couple of minutes. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Jaewon Choi, and I'm representing the DMUN Foundation today, which is an INGO that works on stakeholder engagement on multilateral institutions. I want to ask a question specifically to either Yubrata or Ali. So I want to ask about the current state of stakeholder engagement, let's say observer statuses or consultative statuses. And there are multiple versions of them, but we know that it's not working. For instance, for UNFCCC observer statuses for NGOs, the waiting time for applications to be processed is 3 years. And the ECOSOC NGO consultative status, the NGO committee that reviews such applications are so politicized that only 1/3 of all applications are ever approved. And so I want to hear both of your perspectives on, is the current state of stakeholder engagement modalities for youth-led NGOs adequate? If it's not adequate, how can we improve it? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. I know it's the last couple minutes, so we only have probably time for 1 or 2 perspective. Yeah, Gardner, you want to?
Thank you, Javon. And I just want to mention that he's one of very valuable, everybody is valuable, but members of MGCY is only 15, right? So very
Yes.
always delighted to have, but I also don't want to put you in a box that you're So what I'm trying to realize is that Joan does really great work when it comes to financing for development and many other processes at the UN. And just to come in on the question that you asked, you are absolutely right. When it comes to certain UN processes, Climate Change Convention and ECOSOC, the waiting time is more. ECOSOC approves less than half of applications received. And you see when you go to other processes, if you look at UNEA, I think it's faster. You get it in 3 months. BRS COPS, which is Chemicals and Waste Convention, it's also very short. You get it approved. Some other processes like UNCCD, it happens on a more rolling basis. You send an application to Secretariat and then it's basically approved unless it's official by COP, but you can already start engaging. So we do see this kind of discrepancy and or unequal timeline. And sometimes I do wonder, I think the reason that we are given is because of the demand that they receive. But I'm not sure if that is fully, like there can always be more done to process things more on time, right? And add to that, I would also add that there are requirements that many youth-led organizations would never meet to get accredited. They sometimes need fully audited bank statements for last 2 months. And if you go to village in India, if you go 5 kilometers from the house I live in India, you would find youth groups that are doing great work, but they don't have a bank account or audited statements or legal registration. Does that mean that they don't have a way to engage, at the UN? I think an answer to that, at least from my perspective, right, one of the answers to that is universalizing access. So if you look at the major groups model, for example, it's been successful in many contexts. And I'm very happy to maybe announce this, but for HLPF this year, we were able to remove limits on how many youth can be accredited under the NGCY umbrella. So there is no limit. So if we want to accredit 1,000 young people to come to HLPF, we are able to do that. And that was after a lot of discussion, and they don't have to come from a formally registered NGO. As long as they are young and have some kind of interest to come to HLPF, they can come to HLPF. So there are ways this can happen. This has also happened. I know that in BRS COPS, they gave more quota to an organization to register more young people. An umbrella quota. Same is happening for the UN Oceans Conference. There are 2 youth organizations that are doing umbrella registrations for young people. But then again, this often happens more on a case-by-case basis, or sometimes you have to advocate for it. So I think some of these things need to be standardized, that basic access should be free to all. It should not be just limited to specific types of, NGOs and organizations. In some cases, youth are at somewhat advantage because there are more youth constituencies in the UN than, for example, women and gender constituencies or indigenous constituencies, because of the way youth are structured, but also the political attention that youth participation has received. If you look at the process of, for example, indigenous engagement, right? There's a whole global indigenous youth caucus that then engages across the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, but it also engages in different other process because they're like a stakeholder group. So I think the answer to that is, and maybe that is something that, we can all take up. And I know that there are some conversations on how do we make sure that ECOSOC Youth Forum is not just a one-off event, but the stakeholders convened by ECOSOC Youth Forum, youth organizations, member states, UN agencies, civil society organizations, and youth serving organizations, which is pretty much the whole ecosystem. If somebody had to map an ecosystem on youth issues, this is what that ecosystem would look like, right? How do you make sure that that continues? And there are some proposals or something called as a youth forum gateway, or there are things that are being made. Hopefully you hear more about it. It's not approved yet, so I can't really talk much on how do you make sure that this stays beyond that. And I think those are some ways to do that. I think the answer, if I had to answer your question, is universal constituencies is what you need as engagement modalities for many processes. You can call them major groups, you can call them constituencies, you can call them, stakeholder engagement platforms, however, but that's really the answer. Universality and equity as we frame it. So yeah, I don't know if Ali, you want to add more.
We actually have to wrap up. If you have some 30 seconds, we have to wrap up really quickly. If you have some,
I just want to say that there's always an email you will receive would say that we have a very small team, and that is an issue within the UN system. Accreditation for the UNFCCC is not 3-4 years, 4 to 5 years, and which they say that, oh, we're going to get back to you in 6 months, but then you will receive an email. We're a very small team. So that is also an issue, but there's another mechanism where people can get in when even they do not have accreditation or something. It's called NGLS. UN NGLS is non-government liaison service. If you do not have formal NGO accredited, or you do not have formal accreditation through any organization at all, NGLS is your way where they accredite organizations who do not have accreditation with ECOSOC, DGC, or other places.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause to our panel. I think this was a very, very helpful, impactful last 90 minutes. Want to, again, and I mean this genuinely, give a round of applause for yourselves for even being here, being invested. The simple fact that you're here means that you care. Thank you to those online. Thank you to MUNers across borders and National Model UN for bringing us together, right? We need these types of platforms, these types of forums, these types of experiences, right, to make sure that we keep our foot on a pedal and bringing forth solutions and continuously addressing challenges. So again, thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to a very rest of our productive conference, but thank you all so much for very informative perspectives. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have